Pope Francis is undeniably one of the most influential and beloved figures in the world today, known for his humility, compassion, and dedication to global peace. He has opened and blessed countless churches across continents, becoming a symbol of faith and unity. So when Notre Dame Cathedral, a masterpiece of history and devotion, reopened after years of restoration, everyone expected him to be there. But he wasn't. Speculations ran wild until Pope Francis finally spoke, dropping a holy bombshell that shocked everyone. Join us as we uncover what Pope Francis said. The journey of Pope Francis. Before we even get to the latest news about him and the bombshell that shocked everyone, let's see who this man is and why he matters so much in today's world. From humble beginnings in Argentina to becoming the leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis' life is a fascinating story of faith, perseverance, and compassion. Let's rewind the clock to where it all began. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the future Pope Francis, was born on December 17, 1936, in Flores, a neighborhood in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The eldest of 5 children, Jorge was the son of Mario José Bergoglio, an Italian immigrant accountant, and Regina Mauri, a homemaker with northern Italian roots. The Bergoglio family had fled Italy in 1929 to escape Mussolini's regime. They didn't leave due to economic hardship but rather out of a desire for freedom and a new start. Growing up in a bustling, close-knit family laid the foundation for Jorge's values, humility, hard work, and love for the community. By all accounts, young Jorge was just like any other kid. He played soccer in the streets, loved his family, and went to school. But there was already something special about him. At Wilfrido Barón de los Santos Angeles, a Jesuit school in Ramos Mejia, Jorge started to develop a sense of discipline and spirituality, even though he was far from imagining the future that awaited him. He later attended Escuela Técnica Industrial No. 27, where he studied chemistry. Yes, believe it or not, the Pope has a background in science. Jorge even earned a diploma as a chemical technician and spent some time working in a food lab. It's hard to picture him in a white lab coat, isn't it? But he was also a young man finding his way in the world, balancing odd jobs like being a janitor and even a bouncer at a bar. However, life took a serious turn when Jorge was 21 when, after battling life-threatening pneumonia and having 3 cysts removed, he lost part of one lung. It was a moment that forced him to pause and think. Around the same time, something happened that changed his life forever. On his way to celebrate Spring Day with friends, Jorge stopped at a church for confession. That visit ignited a spark within him, calling to serve the church. From that moment on, his life was no longer about chemicals and odd jobs, but about faith and helping others. In 1958, Jorge entered the Society of Jesus, becoming a Jesuit novice. His Jesuit training took him from Argentina to Santiago, Chile, where he studied humanities and eventually back to Buenos Aires for philosophy. During this time, he had moments of doubt, even admitting to having a crush on a girl. He was human after all. But Jorge stayed committed to his path. He took his first vows as a Jesuit in 1960 and began teaching literature and psychology in high schools. Imagine having a future pope as your teacher. By 1969, after years of study, Jorge was ordained as a priest, ready to take on greater responsibilities within the church. From there, his career within the Jesuits accelerated. By 1973, he had taken his final vows and was appointed the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina. During his 6-year term, Jorge emphasized pastoral work and a deep connection with the people. Even as tensions grew within the Jesuit community, not everyone agreed with his priorities, but his commitment to the faith remained unwavering. After serving as rector of the Philosophical and Theological Faculty in San Miguel, Jorge's role in the church continued to evolve. His humility and dedication did not go unnoticed. In 1992, he was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires, and by 1998, he was the city's Archbishop. It was here that Jorge earned his nickname, the Slum Bishop. While others might have distanced themselves from the poorest neighborhoods, he moved closer. He doubled the number of priests working in Buenos Aires slums, washing the feet of the marginalized, visiting hospitals, and walking alongside those forgotten by society. Then, in 2001, Pope John Paul II elevated him to the rank of cardinal, giving him global prominence. Jorge Bergoglio's simplicity, humility, and commitment to social justice set him apart. He didn't live in lavish residences, he cooked his own meals and took the bus to work. Even in Rome, he was known for his low profile and lightning-fast visits, refusing to bask in the spotlight. When Pope Benedict XVI resigned in 2013, the world was stunned. The cardinals gathered for a conclave to choose the next leader of the Catholic Church, and to the surprise of many, they elected Jorge Mario Bergoglio, taking the name Francis after Saint Francis of Assisi. The humble man from Argentina became the first Jesuit pope, the first pope from the Americas, and the first non-European pope in over 1,200 years. Immediately signaled a new era, one of simplicity, compassion, and reform. The papacy of Pope Francis has been unlike any other in modern times since Jorge Mario Bergoglio became pope in 2013. At 76 years old, he arrived on the world stage with a smile, a simple wave, and a heart set on serving others. But what makes Pope Francis such a remarkable and important figure today? Well, it's not just his position, it's the way he lives it. From the moment of his election, Francis broke traditions and set a tone of humility and accessibility. On the night he became pope, he skipped the fancy papal car and joined his fellow cardinals on the bus back to their hotel. The next day, he quietly visited a sick friend in the hospital, no fanfare, no red carpets, just Francis being Francis. One of his first decisions as pope was to choose the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, a saint known for his devotion to the poor and his love for nature. Pope Francis later explained that during the conclave, a fellow cardinal whispered to him, "Don't forget the poor." That moment stuck with him. He wanted a poor church for the poor, and he has spent the last decade living up to that call. As we already mentioned, Pope Francis is a man of firsts, the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the first to live outside the traditional papal apartments. Instead, he chose to reside in the Vatican's guest house, where he shares meals and conversations with visitors. He's made it clear that being a pope isn't about status or luxury, it's about service. His leadership has been marked by an emphasis on mercy, compassion, and inclusivity. In 2015, he declared a year of mercy, encouraging Catholics worldwide to focus on forgiveness and acts of kindness. He opened special doors of mercy in churches and cathedrals around the globe, symbolizing God's open arms for all people. Francis also redefined what it means to be close to the people. He's known for embracing everyone, the sick, the poor, the elderly, and even those on the margins of society. He famously washed the feet of prisoners, including women and Muslims, during the Holy Thursday ritual. For Francis, no one is too small to deserve love and dignity. As a Jesuit, Francis has brought the Jesuit tradition of discernment, listening for God's call, into his papacy. He often emphasizes the need to focus on serving others rather than getting caught up in rules or formalities. In his words, pastors must have the smell of the sheep, reminder to stay close to the people they serve. Francis has also made strides to modernize the Church's organization, from reforming the Vatican's financial practices to encouraging greater participation in Church decisions. His leadership has been about collaboration and renewal. He established a council of cardinals to advise him and brought in experts to tackle long-standing challenges like transparency and accountability. A global figure, Pope Francis has used his platform to call for peace, care for the environment, and solidarity with the poor. He's traveled to places no pope has visited before, such as Iraq, where he offered hope to dwindling Christian communities in every corner of the world. His message remains the same: love, mercy, and humility. Perhaps what makes Francis so beloved is his ability to connect with ordinary people. Whether he's chatting with crowds in St. Peter's Square or writing heartfelt letters, he brings a personal touch to his role. He reminds us that being a leader isn't about power, it's about serving others. Why the world loves Pope Francis? The real reason why so many people across the globe admire Pope Francis comes down to one simple fact: he reminds us of the goodness in humanity. Whether it's through his words or his actions, Pope Francis teaches that being kind, charitable, and humanitarian is not just a choice, but a responsibility we all share. Since becoming Pope in 2013, Francis has made charity a cornerstone of his papacy. For him, charity is a way of life. He constantly preaches that faith without action is empty, and he leads by example, always putting compassion into practice. One of Pope Francis's most striking statements emphasizes that a Christian faith that fails to challenge the powers that be and does not inspire a deep commitment to charity risks becoming nothing more than a harmless form of devotion. In other words, faith must inspire real, tangible change. Pope Francis's humanitarian work has been nothing short of inspiring. Recently, after devastating earthquakes shook Turkey and Syria, the Pope didn't just send prayers, he sent real help, aid supplies, financial support, and the coordinated efforts of organizations like the Rava Foundation, which were dispatched to refugee camps. Whether it's food, medicine, or shelter, Francis believes in practical charity that reaches those who need it most. His dedication to Ukraine is another prime example. Long before the recent conflict, Pope Francis had his eyes on the suffering there. In 2016, he personally donated $6 million to provide not just food and clothing, but also medical care and therapy. For Francis, charity doesn't stop at addressing immediate needs, it also means helping people heal, rebuild, and regain their dignity. Pope Francis doesn't just rely on massive organizations to do this work, he also inspires and uplifts smaller groups who share his vision. He applauds the efforts of organizations like Cadus International, which operates in over 200 countries, and the University College for Aspiring Missionary Doctors, which sends doctors to underserved hospitals in Africa. These organizations may not always make headlines, but their work is life-changing, and Pope Francis continues to support them. Pope Francis makes sure they know how valuable they are. Even in his home continent of South America, Francis has inspired countless projects aimed at tackling poverty, homelessness, and inequality. During the World Day of the Poor, he reminded the Church that serving the poor is not optional. In a moving homily, Pope Francis emphasized that the Church truly becomes the Church of Jesus to the extent that it serves the poor. This is Pope Francis in a nutshell, a man who believes that helping the most vulnerable is at the heart of Christianity. One of his most innovative charity initiatives focuses on children, what he calls the seeds of the future. His global network for children aims to create hubs of medical excellence that provide care for young people in underserved regions. It's a beautiful reminder that while some illnesses may be incurable, no child should ever be considered incurable in the eyes of love. What sets Francis apart is his ability to pair grand ideas with small personal touches. He shares meals with the poor, embraces the sick, and encourages others to do the same. During one World Day of the Poor, he personally shared lunch with 1,300 struggling people, an act so simple yet so profound. In the end, Pope Francis makes charity feel possible for everyone. Whether you're donating money, volunteering time, or simply showing kindness to someone in need, he reminds us that even small acts of love can transform the world. And in a world that often feels divided and uncertain, that's the kind of leader we need, a global journey of peace. It's clear to you by now that Pope Francis is not one to sit quietly behind Vatican walls. In fact, from the very beginning of his papacy in 2013, he has been on the move, visiting countries far and wide, spreading messages of peace, hope, and interfaith dialogue. His travels are never for show or ceremony, they are deliberate, heartfelt, and aimed at bringing people together during some of the most trying times in our modern world. However, 2024 has proven to be a year unlike any other, arguably the busiest of his papacy so far, and his international visits have taken on a whole new level of significance. Let's rewind for a moment and remember how it all began. One of Pope Francis's first and most iconic trips was to Brazil in 2013 for World Youth Day. Picture this, a sea of 3.5 million pilgrims at Copacabana Beach, all gathered to hear the new Pope call on them to lead full, meaningful lives. He urged young people not to be part-time Christians, sparking a fire of faith that spread far beyond the shores of Rio de Janeiro. That trip set the tone for his global mission, a pope who wouldn't stay hidden in tradition but would travel the world to stand with people wherever they were. From there, Francis's passport quickly filled up. He visited conflict zones and historical moments worldwide, spreading messages of hope, peace, and faith. Regions and forgotten corners of the world, delivering a consistent message of unity and healing. In 2014, his powerful visit to the Holy Land saw him praying at the West Bank barrier and meeting with religious leaders, including Patriarch Bartholomew. It wasn't just a religious tour, it was a deliberate call for dialogue and peace in a region long marred by conflict. That same year, he headed to South Korea, where he beatified 124 Korean martyrs in front of a crowd of 800,000 people, proof of his ability to draw people together in faith, no matter how divided a region might be. Of course, Pope Francis's global reach hasn't been limited to the Christian world. Time and time again, he's shown his willingness to bridge the gaps between faiths. Whether addressing the European Parliament in 2014 or celebrating one of the largest ever papal masses in the Philippines in 2015 with an astonishing 7 million attendees, his travels have been a blend of spiritual leadership and global diplomacy. Fast forward to 2024, and it's as if Pope Francis kicked things into an even higher gear. This year has seen him embark on a whirlwind of international visits, each one carefully planned to address pressing global issues, religious harmony, social justice, and peace. His agenda has been relentless, but so has his message. The highlight of the year was undoubtedly his ambitious Southeast Asia and Oceania tour in September. First stop, Indonesia, the largest Muslim-majority country in the world. There, in an extraordinary moment of interfaith cooperation, Pope Francis and Grand Imam Nasruddin Umar signed the Joint Declaration of Istanbul 2024, a document promoting religious harmony and tackling humanitarian and environmental crises. It was a powerful reminder that different faiths can and must work together to heal the world. From Indonesia, Francis traveled to Papua New Guinea, where he didn't just talk about peace, he advocated for an end to tribal violence that had plagued local communities. His presence brought humanitarian aid and much-needed hope to the struggling region. In East Timor, a country where Catholicism runs deep, he celebrated Mass before a crowd of 600,000, nearly half the population. It was a moment of reconciliation and encouragement for a nation still recovering from past conflicts. In Singapore, Francis turned his attention to education, urging young people to embrace interfaith dialogue as the key to building a more peaceful future. But the Pope didn't stop there. Later in the year, he visited Luxembourg, a small yet powerful country with a sharp focus on economic justice. Pope Francis called on wealthy nations to take responsibility for helping the world's poorest. And finally, in December, he made history with a visit to Corsica, the first by any pope. There, Francis delivered a powerful message about balancing secular and religious values, advocating for a dynamic secularity where faith and civic life coexist harmoniously. So why are these visits so important? It's simple, Pope Francis knows that words alone can't bring change. By physically traveling to these places, whether it's a slum, a war-torn village, or a bustling city square, he shows solidarity with the people. He reminds world leaders of their responsibility to act, turning his visits into powerful symbols of hope, unity, and global cooperation. Responsibilities while encouraging ordinary citizens to take action, his presence brings attention to the overlooked, the forgotten, and the marginalized. These trips are transformative, yet amidst all these significant travels, there was one trip that didn't quite go as planned: Paris. It was supposed to be a major moment, eagerly anticipated by both the Vatican and the French public. But just as everything seemed to fall into place, chaos erupted. But more on that later. In addition to these trips, Pope Francis has become a key figure at some of the most significant church openings and dedications worldwide. Whether it's inaugurating a restored basilica, blessing a humble chapel in a remote village, or standing in solidarity at churches rebuilt after war or disaster, his presence always carries deep meaning as a symbol of hope and faith. Pope Francis doesn't just show up, he leaves a lasting impression. Take the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome, for example. When this iconic basilica underwent restorations, it was only fitting that Pope Francis led the Jubilee celebrations. His presence highlighted not just the basilica's historical importance but also the ongoing renewal of the Church itself, reminding Catholics that the beauty of faith often comes through preservation and restoration. But the Pope's influence isn't limited to Rome or grand cathedrals. On his global travels, he's often found in churches located in crisis areas, where destruction and tragedy have left communities broken. A particularly moving example was his visit to Iraq in 2021. There, Pope Francis stood inside churches that had been reduced to rubble. His visit to these restored buildings was far more than ceremonial, it was a powerful call for healing, rebuilding, and the unshakable resilience of faith. In developing regions, Pope Francis often shines a spotlight on churches that serve as sanctuaries for the poor and vulnerable. Whether it's in the slums of Latin America, the rural villages of Africa, or remote parts of Asia, he blesses newly built churches that become lifelines for their communities. Of course, St. Peter's Basilica and Vatican City remains a cornerstone of his liturgical work. From Christmas Eve Mass to Easter celebrations, Pope Francis frequently leads global worship in this spiritual heart of Catholicism, reinforcing its importance in the lives of millions. But then came the Notre Dame dilemma. As the world watched the painstaking restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris following the devastating 2019 fire, anticipation grew. Surely, when the iconic church finally reopened, Pope Francis, arguably the most important religious figure in the world, would be there to mark the moment. Yet, to everyone's surprise, his presence was noticeably absent. Why did Pope Francis skip Notre Dame's grand reopening? Since then, the world has gone completely crazy, and everyone was wondering what happened because it was announced that he would also come. Recently, Pope Francis shocked everyone when he said, "It's time to tell everything." The grand reopening of the beloved Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris was supposed to be a historic, joyous occasion. After 5 years of painstaking restoration, the iconic church, devastated by fire in 2019, was ready to welcome the faithful once again. Yet, the absence of Pope Francis, originally expected to lead the inaugural Mass, has left everyone stunned and buzzing with questions. Why wasn't he there? The announcement came during one of his traditional in-flight interviews. When asked about his absence from the grand reopening of Notre Dame, Pope Francis simply stated that he had other commitments. He then elaborated, saying, "It's time to tell everything. My absence was not out of disregard but a recognition that the Church's true strength lies not in grand buildings but in its people and their faith." He went on to emphasize the importance of focusing on those who are often forgotten, a message that underscored his commitment to humility and service. While his response seemed polite and practical, many couldn't help but feel it was just a facade, fueling speculation that something deeper was behind his decision. The surprise left the French people and believers worldwide wondering what the real reason could be. While Pope Francis didn't go into much detail, the French public reacted with a mix of confusion and disappointment. After all, Notre Dame is more than just a church, it's a symbol of faith, history, and resilience. Millions hoped to see the pontiff there to mark its revival, making his absence even more surprising. For many, it felt like a piece of the celebration was missing. The rest of the world shared similar sentiments, speculating about his reasons. But true to Francis's style, his absence isn't without purpose. He is a pope known for prioritizing those in need, and perhaps he felt called elsewhere. Whatever the case, his decision has only deepened the mystery surrounding this monumental moment. Why do you think Pope Francis chose not to attend such a significant event?